Hey there, friends and running fans. This is Amby Burfoot welcoming you to the latest episode of the podcast, Running State of the Sport.
And this is George Hirsch, your co-host of Running State of the Sport. In every episode, we talk to the smartest, most informed, most influential, and sometimes fastest runners on the planet.
This week, our podcast guest is Jack Fleming, CEO of the Boston Marathon. But first, George and I would like to discuss several recent running stories that we've found really interesting. We've got to talk a little bit about the World Championships in Budapest, which just completed. They were sensational, but the most amazing thing of all to me, George, is I've heard that you actually picked the women's 800 first, second, and third in the correct order. How did you ever do that?
Well, that is true. It was one of the featured races, as you know, with three very big names. And it was simply, obviously guesswork plays a role, but Mary Moraa of Kenya had been running just superbly during the summer. And I just felt that there was an edge there. Keely Hutchinson has been consistently good with one or two races that didn't quite live up to it during the build-up. And then I think, Mo, I feel she's the biggest talent of all. There was some big question as to whether she was even going to run. She herself said she was struggling with some issues, and it just didn't sound like the perfect setup for her to perform at her best.
Well, I had the top three on the podium, but I certainly didn't have 1, 2, 3 as you did. Were there other highlights from the 9-day competition that stood out for you?
Oh my gosh, so many. I thought it was an incredible championship. A few that really stuck out in my mind was Femke Bol, the incredible 400-meter hurdler and 400-meter runner from the Netherlands, falling, 5 meters from the finish of the mixed 4x400 relay, depriving the Netherlands of the gold, and then coming back on the final night of the games in the 4x400 and just running an incredible race, coming from third to first off the final turn and showing that she and Sydney McLaughlin are going to make some great, run at Paris next year. I'm looking forward to that one. I also, Amby, I got a big kick out of the women's pole vault. Nina Kennedy of Australia, Katie Moon from the U.S. were, matching jump after jump. And finally, they got to the point where they were at a tie and they all missed their final jump. And at that moment, it was up to them to decide whether they wanted to continue on with the competition or share a gold medal. And they briefly chatted. There it was right on TV. And then they gave each other a lovely hug, and they agreed to both walk away with golds. And there was something awfully nice about that.
Well, I have to admit, I don't follow the field events closely enough so that I even knew that a tie was a possibility. I think I'm living in the era when officials tried to separate Frank Shorter and Jack Batchelor and tell them they couldn't tie back in the 1970s. But I think that's a good way to do it, to let the athletes decide. I have to say, again, the sprints aren't my thing, but the U.S. sprinters were just downright sensational. Sha'Carri Richardson came through and proved she belongs on the world stage. Gabby Thomas, we knew was great. She showed it again. And Noah Lyles just had a fantastic race. And I don't remember when. I've seen lots of U.S. 4x100 relay teams kind of mess it up, but to see both of them come through was fantastic. And I just loved Grant Holloway's victory in the high hurdles because it was picture perfect. The photos showed that he didn't touch a single hurdle. He won his third World Championships in a row, and it was quite terrific. In the events that I watch more closely, of course, we all know now that Faith Kipyegon has gone where no female runner has gone before. She's had a great career, but it's even higher now. And to see her win those 2 golds was just confirmation of how great she is. And I'm also one who's believing Jakob Ingebrigtsen when he says he was competing with a virus in part of the meet. I didn't think he looked as good as he had looked early in the season, and I give him a lot of credit for really gutting it out and coming through with that last-minute kick to win the 5,000 as he did in the last Worlds. But my single favorite moment of the entire meet was the qualifying round in the women's 5,000, where a 19-year-old girl from Latvia, who I'm sure she had heard of Faith Kipyegon and Safan Hassan and everyone else, but she totally detached herself from them. She was a half a lap ahead of them for most of the race because she needed to finish in a top spot to qualify. She got passed in the last lap by a few of them, but she finished strong and she did qualify. And it was a stirring effort on her half. And she didn't run the final because she had an injury. And I got to say, I'm happy she's protecting herself for the future because I want to see her put out some more gritty results like that in a few.
Agree with you, Amby. Stories like Agat Cahoon, a name I frankly, wasn't even familiar with going into the name games. I think these are the kinds of stories you just love about a championship like this.
Yeah, and they proved again that the championships has certain storylines which can be depended on, but the really exciting and thrilling ones, the reasons we watch, are the ones that we never expected to see, but they happen because life and sport is like that. Overall, the world champs in Budapest were sensational. I'm sure World Athletics is thrilled. Maybe in our next podcast, we can talk a little bit about the marathons. But for now, it's time to get on to that interview with Boston Marathon CEO Jack Fleming. This podcast is brought to you by marathonhandbook.com and runlongrunhealthy.com. Marathon Handbook is the world's leading marathon website with a special focus on trustworthy running information and free runner-tested training plans for all ability levels.
And Run Long, Run Healthy is Amby's weekly newsletter with the newest, most scientific, and most useful training advice for runners. He spends hours searching the internet so you can review the best new content in just minutes.
Now let's turn to Jack Fleming, our guest this week. Jack is the Chief Executive Officer of the Boston Athletic Association, which is, of course, the organizers of the Boston Marathon. And last April was a really important time for Jack because it marked his first year as CEO of the BAA and the Boston Marathon.
And it was a particularly exciting year, Jack, because you had Eliud Kipchoge for the first time at the Boston Marathon.
So, Jack Fleming, welcome to the Running State of the Sport podcast. We're really pleased and excited to have you with us today.
Thanks for the invitation to be with you, sit with you. I'm so looking forward to talking about the topic that so many runners want to talk about, presumably the Boston Marathon, but maybe running in Boston in general.
We'll do as much of that as we can. So, Jack, if you were head of a big corporation, you'd be trying to maximize profits. I suppose that's not what you do at the BAA. But what does the CEO of the BAA do on a daily basis? And then what did you do on Marathon Day last April?
Well, the CEO of the Boston Athletic Association, we are a nonprofit organization, and we have a mission, of course. We have a vision, and we have some values that we try to impart every day that we all come to work. We are an organization since 1887 when we were established to promote health and fitness, especially through running events. During the COVID times, we've doubled down on the organization, and our vision, we came out of that wanting to make running more accessible. And some of the values that we talk about here on a really daily basis talk about our heritage, being authentic, community, being active, and doing it as a team. So this is all to say that this leads into establishing a strategy for how we're going to do that. Of course, we have to, though we're a nonprofit, conduct ourselves very much like a business, and channel that back into especially the community and understand our leadership position. And there are times when it calls for that, taking a stand sometimes, leading the way. Also, of course, collaborating with not only our peers, but our peer organizations, but our many organizations in town. So we're keenly aware of just the regard that so many in the community, whether they run the Boston Marathon or run one of our events or not, there's a lot of pride in running in Boston, right? And the BAA and what we stand for is a part of that. We're not all of that, but we're a part of that. So the strategy, the mission, the vision, the values, and leading the way and supporting our team.
So, Jack, you talk about your strategic plan and you mentioned your mission going forward. In doing so, what do you see as the state of your event, the Boston Marathon, and the sport at large? What do you see that's excellent, what's good, and what could be improved?
Well, one of the excellent aspects in our view is that unlike any other point in maybe our history together, the idea of running our marathon or a marathon is so within reach for many more. I would imagine, as I'm too maybe a student of history, or like to think that I am, read a lot, that there was a time, an important time, the formative years of our sport, when maybe not everyone knew someone who was running a marathon or the Boston Marathon or a marathon in any big city. But now we know that when someone is running a marathon or training for a marathon or training for endurance, it can be so inspirational across a wider network. Someone's activity, someone's effort truly can inspire someone else. Maybe that someone else will start walking, do a mile. Doesn't have to be a 5K race. Maybe it does turn into a 5K run or jog. And this is good because it leads to a healthier lifestyle. And when there's this idea of health and fitness. We believe, actually, I was going to say we know, but we believe that everyone is happier, right? We believe that everyone lives healthier. There are studies, of course, that prove that. But from the base level, activity is good. And if there are events and signature events and events like ours that exist that can be goals that are pointed towards, then we understand that, and we take that responsibility to curate that experience quite seriously.
Jack, how about your own personal running experience? I'm not sure. Have you run Boston or another marathon? How did you get into the sport?
Well, thank you for asking. My history in the sport is probably very common and similar to that of many other recreational runners. I am originally from New Orleans, Louisiana, and started off by just running one lap around Christian Brothers School, my middle school. I ran for Jesuit High School in New Orleans, and was cut from the baseball team, which caused me or resulted in me doubling down in cross country. We did not have indoor track to speak of, outdoor track. And then that matched with maybe I could continue on in college. And so I went to Boston College and just showed up, was in the stands, saw him working out. Somebody identified this kid who was just sitting there and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" I said, I'm thinking about it. And they said, "Come on, just give it a try." So I was really welcomed. And the guy's name is Ken Moody. He's from Long Island. He was a high jumper, and I'll never forget it. And that group took me in, and was living right off of Center Street at the time. My first workout, I think, was up Heartbreak Hill. Randy Thomas had us running something along the lines of 10 times Heartbreak Hill, right, up and down.
Piece of cake.
Our first dual meet was I think Northeastern at Franklin Park. So places now 30 something, 33, more than that, 35, 6, 7 years later, still running the exact same places. I was at Franklin Park last night for our youth developmental track meet at White Stadium, and after that, I stopped off at Boston College and ran up Heartbreak Hill. So love it.
So have you run the Boston Marathon?
I fortunately, unfortunately, I am working that day. So, however, during the COVID time, when we offered our Boston Marathon virtual experience, I did train and complete that Boston Marathon. But and it was good. It was, and I'm not being facetious at all. We got to design our own course. I did not run it on the Boston Marathon route because we were asking people to be really respectful during that particular time, and I didn't. We were mindful of that. We happen to live right off of the 11-mile mark, so I'm always on the marathon course. But to be specific, to answer your question, George, during the COVID time is when I did it, and I have a medal somewhere, and a T-shirt somewhere, and a certificate somewhere that shows that I'm proud of it.
That's fantastic. You're not new to the BAA. You've been with the BAA for a long time. Could you tell our listeners what you've been doing through the decades until you became CEO?
Sure. Thank you. We started off as an intern or volunteer before that, was an intern. One of my first assignments under Guy Morrison, Maria Baker, and Gloria Ratty was to write a newsletter, start a newsletter. It's called the Unicorn. Oh, that's, what else would it be called? It was for the club. But it was an era when we only had, I believe, 8 staff members, and I was not even full-time at that time. So would do other things, whether it be receive inventory into our warehouse, sweep up afterwards, clean up afterwards, but really came through the communications. What do we call it? We didn't call it communications back then. We probably called it press information, that route. Then it became media and evolved into marketing and promotions, eventually added sponsorship to that. And then more recently, when the organization was growing, Tom Grilk and the BAA board asked me to be the COO of the organization. That's when, now we're an organization of approximately 37, 38. And so I had the opportunity to learn under some fantastic leaders and different board presidents all along the way.
So, Jack, you mentioned Guy Morse, you mentioned Tom Grilk as two of the leaders that have mentored you. And tell us a little bit what you've learned from working for them and observing them over the years.
Both of those leaders have made tremendous impressions on me and our work style overall. Guy will forever be known to me as the person who hired me, right? Along with Maury Baker, so he took a chance, and what were my skills? I was limited. I'm a communications person. I was also an economics person. But he was really patient with me. And Guy's a listener. He really is. And allowed me or encouraged me to take on various projects and grew me within the organization. And when I see our talented staff now, I reflect back on that at times and look for opportunities where they can grow. We know that it's a market where there are many attractive opportunities. So we have to be more attractive to retain our good talent. As far as Tom, what instantly comes to mind is his preparation. I'm sure he was that way. He was a marathoner, well under sub 3 hours. He put a lot of time, dedication into that. I don't know that and Tom would let me into his office I'm sitting in right now, and I would see how he would pore over papers and agreements and just look at things from all different angles. So the preparation was truly impressive.
Jack, as since you've been there for several decades now, I can't help but ask you, what was your experience in 2013? Where were you? What was it like personally? And even if there was a lesson or impact that you got from that day.
Yes, I know that everyone has their own experience, memory, story that came out of that day. And I haven't spoken all that much about it. We're 10 years on now. And I was in the media press area in the Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel in a vestibule area which leads right out onto Copley Square Park, St. James Avenue. And I can recall, I believe it was the Metro West Daily News. And, the race was starting to wind down. There was still a lot of finishers. Obviously, we know that. But it was, the professional portion was coming to an end. The press conferences had just concluded. I was getting ready to head back out. Metro West Daily asked me, "So what do you think?" And I was commenting on how blue the sky was that particular day, how crisp it was, how much of a runner's day it was, especially after 2012, where it was a more difficult day with heat in Boston. That it was wonderful for Boston, not just the runners, but wonderful for the volunteers to be able to have a good day. And then we started to we heard a noise, and from where I was, it sounded like a large truck ran into another large truck. Sometimes in a hotel environment, you hear these loud noises, and and then we heard some yelling and screaming, and then we heard another large one. And right around that time, I saw my colleague in the press area, TK Skandarian, come running towards me, and he told me, and from there it just started to go and go and go and go and go. You asked the second part of that question, Amby, and I'll fast forward a little bit. One of the, I'll call it blessings or therapeutic aspects for me and for many in our position at the BA is that we got to work on the next year immediately. It was challenging because it was bigger. It was immediately larger than anything. I don't know that we knew immediately how large this was or how large the challenge was going to be. In the days afterwards, I can recall thinking, well, after maybe a week or two afterwards, there was this interest from everyone who wanted to support. How could anyone play a role in making sure that this revered event that's so synonymous with not only our sport but Boston, but freedom, and it's all of that was going to be back, safe, protected. I don't think that we were in the mindset of better than ever at that point. We were just wanting to make sure that we built back. So being able to work on that immediately through the very difficult days, weeks, months, summer, fall, we had to work quickly, was what we could do. There was a lot we couldn't do, but that's what we could do, and that stays with me. That stays with us.
Boston strong.
Absolutely. I was just walking down Boylston Street, try to do it as much as possible, and there are two memorials now outside on Boylston Street that I hope that anyone who comes to Boston, runner or not, when they come down Boylston Street, remember.
Jack, you carry a lot of the tradition and the history of Boston, and obviously talking about the bombing in 2013 is certainly one of the major, although tragic, events in the history of the Boston Marathon. Can you think of a few others, maybe three other significant Boston Marathon moments from your decades at the BAA and what meaning they have?
Sure. I mean, it's hard not to think of the Centennial Boston Marathon in 1996. That changed our organization. It was so anticipated by the running world, by Runner's World. I'll never forget the cover of Runner's World with simply the classic Boston Marathon champions medallion on the cover. Just so simple that conjured up the race through history. And all that went with that. And it was a reminder for us that we are viewed as the original. So maybe other races are much larger. Some races may be more spectacular, but our position is as the original. So, there are a bunch of funny stories around that because until that time, we didn't have field size limits. I don't think field size limit was a term in our sport, certainly not in marathoning, right? But that led to the idea of field size limit for the Boston, because you have to be able to plan for it. I think we had 38,700 and some odd for that year's race, and it was more of a celebration parade from Hopkinton to Boston. It was, another one of those years that everyone wanted to be a part of in some way. So that's the 90s. I have a memory also of Gene Driscoll in the wheelchair, great wheelchair division champion for us, who was working so hard to be at that time the all-time champion in any division. And when she arrived around Cleveland Circle, approximately 22.25, somewhere around that point, right around the reservoir, coming onto Beacon Street, her wheel got caught in the Green Line track, and she had an accident, crashed, and did not win that year. And she came back a subsequent year. She had food poisoning, and then she had to come back yet again. But I don't know, George. I think that perseverance so captured the attention of so many, like really brought a lot of attention for this important division in the race. I know that that's also an important location in history. That's a place that was referenced to Bill Rogers, right? That if you're going to win the fourth, you're going to have to go by Cleveland Circle. And there was some, as the story goes, there was a time during that 1980 race where there was the idea of, taking a stand for any particular issue, social issue, political issue, was going to maybe have an effect. And so, the idea of the Boston Marathon being a platform, being the place that so many great moments have happened, whether it be Catherine Switzer in 1967 and Jock Semple and, hey, I want my bib number back, right? Or Bob Hall in the wheelchair division in 1975. Just through the decades, it seems like if it's happened in our sport, it's happened at Boston, and we do embrace that. Things happen from time to time. And then what's the third? I think the third may be less specific, George. More recently, I always used to get super geeked up to see the first to the finish. I mean, I'm thinking right now of Eliud Kipchoge and fast times and Jeffrey Mutai and fast times and thinking that the clock was wrong. But more recently, we look at the way the race is finishing up in the afternoon and Boylston Street and maybe the final hour, and how if you can really feel the effort that so many have put out there for months and years to get to that moment, to be able to run Boylston Street. And to see them finishing, you can only imagine what all went into that. And it's not easy. It's easy for a slim person to put on sleek-looking outfits sometime and look super fast. And yeah, it is fun to run fast. But it's also important to keep going and to push through and to be there. And I think we all, across the entire sport, appreciate that now like never before. Celebrating the final part of the race and keeping the systems open so that can happen. And I'll continue on this if you will, because it leads me to this past year's event. And some may know that we ran out of medals, and I'm so disappointed for them, and I'm so sorry that we did. How did that happen? Ouch. I don't know. We didn't order enough. We didn't have enough. We didn't distribute them properly, evenly, or whatnot. I have to take full responsibility for that, and I do. And that won't happen again. There is no saving grace to that, because if you work so hard, yes, you will have been able to cross that blue and gold finish line that says finish right by the Boston Public Library. But believe me, we want to, and we want our volunteers to be able to drape a unicorn around every finisher's neck.
Jack, thank you for starting with the hard question. Since you did, I'll continue along that vein.
Absolutely.
You may have heard that there are some runners not overly thrilled with the qualifying system, where you have qualifying times that aren't quite guaranteed qualifying times. What can you say about that? And are there any thoughts about changing the system?
Yeah. So right now, the field has been in recent history. Recent history is really the last 15, 20 plus years. The percentage has been 80% qualifiers, maybe a little bit more sometimes, 20% invitational entries, non-qualifiers. Some of those are for charitable fundraising. Some of those are for sponsors. But generally speaking, the 80, 81, 82%, that is for qualifiers. Interestingly, the COVID years have reset the overall global and domestic demand. We rely on the qualifying races, 550, 575 around the world, to produce that participant base. Of course, our number one qualifier every year is the Boston Marathon itself, right? And people want to return and use that. As we have adjusted the qualifying times, maybe a total of 10 times over the last 40 years-ish, we truly do always revisit that. It is an example of supply and demand, the principles of economics at play. Our field size is 30,000 total right now. And over the last 2 years, coming out of COVID, we have been able to satisfy all of that demand from qualifiers. Now, I believe, Amby, you're also asking about whether the idea of a qualifying time for an older age group or whatever gender maybe is equitable, fair, gauged, etc. Do I think that the qualifying times are perfect? I do not. However, we do think that they are, how do I say it? A combination of art with science. And we would always be open to the analysis and a better way. We work with different groups. You may be familiar with a statistical department in University of North Carolina that we've referenced a few times. They've been extremely helpful in not telling us what to do, but to help us model different possibilities that could be occurring. It's difficult to properly model well into the future. Our best data is our most recent data, and that is especially born and holds true in the post-COVID years. Let me lead, though, to the idea of wanting to be more accessible so that we can be that event that if you try hard enough, there is a pathway. So we roll up our sleeves internally and we think of what are other ways? How can someone be able to run the Boston Marathon? So this is what we're trying to do in the years ahead. Create pathways. Are the qualifying times perfect? No. And are they a subject for discussion and debate and heated debate and hey, we would propose this? Yeah, absolutely. That's a good thing. We don't dismiss any of that. We are in a better position than ever before to crunch and analyze the data because of the way it comes in. We know what it's going to be for 2024, and we didn't make a change for 2024.
Jack, let me ask you, after decades with Hancock as your title sponsor, tell us about the transition to Bank of America. What did they like most about their first Boston Marathon? What did the BAA feel about the relationship with the Bank of America? And those transitions are big. They're not so easy to make. But tell us your perspective.
Sure. John Hancock, from 1986 through this past year, 2023, 38 great years. Now we're poised for a refresh. And so Bank of America saw Boston, after some experience, of course, with Chicago, saw Boston as a real opportunity to help us. My earphone popped. Sorry about that. To help us be that good steward. They saw the opportunity to help us together in partnership deliver on experience. They wanted to be with us going forward, not just for the Boston Marathon, but in all that we do, all of our programs, all of our other races, 5K, 10K, half marathon, anything new that we will be doing, our clinics program, our charity program. They're going to be, it's going to be called the Bank of America Boston Marathon Expo, as an example. So if they have their name on that, you can be sure that they're going to bring the best of their experiential elements that they employ, not just at Chicago, but in all of their sports, all of their marquee blue chip properties that they have in sports marketing across the entire country, across the world. So that's just one of the things that Boston can look forward to. They don't want to change this event. They want to enhance it. And a lot of the discussions from the very beginning, but all along the way, we talked about that. We talked about that. And, a lot of people were wondering, what's the name going to be? What's it going to be called? And we talked about that with Bank of America, and Bank of America was truly wonderful, truly fantastic. And I say fantastic in the dictionary definition of that word. They are fans of this event. They know what Boston Marathon, this event means to and symbolizes. They wanted to be part of that. They wanted to enhance it. They wanted to be this event that everyone looks forward to on Patriots Day. And they wanted to support us in, hey, these things that you've wanted to do, these things that you have a whiteboard, tell us. Let's work together on that. And that's when even from the beginning, we never referred to Bank of America as an oncoming sponsor. It was always, what is this partnership going to look like? And this summer, that is what we're doing, the summer into the fall. And, they don't want to we don't want to make dramatic changes. We do want to make improvements to what we're doing.
Jack, shortly after the race this year, we all became aware of some kind of incident out around the 21-mile mark. And most of us don't feel like we know what happened there, but there were some very eager, supportive Black running group cheering folks. And then suddenly the Newton or some police force showed up. And of course, you're the CEO of the BAA, so you got pretty much dragged into it, whether you wanted to be or not. Well, in your words, what happened out there, and what was the aftermath of your meetings?
I'll answer the first part, the last part first. There have been a tremendous number of learnings for us as an organization over the past immediately afterwards and in the past months and ongoing still. We want everyone to have a great experience. The participants, the runners, those who are in para divisions, adaptive athletes, wheelchair division. We also want spectators, any spectators from start to finish to have a good experience. We want the volunteers to have a great experience. We want public safety personnel. We want agencies. We want the communities that we go through lots of residential areas. We want everyone to have a great experience on Patriots Day. That is one of the things that is magical, can be magical about Patriots Day. What happened? There were some. Mile 21 is not a unique concept to the Boston Marathon. It's a newer concept at Boston, but there's a mile 21 cheering concept at many other marathons around the world in the United States. There's also the idea of, cheer zones in general, whether it be half marathon at 10 miles or 5 miles within a 10K, right? It's that location in an endurance race, in a marathon, that you need a little bit more help, right? So that's where the idea of the location of mile 21 it comes from. So there are places along the course that have barricades, stanchions. Some places it's placed like historically where crowds gather at this particular location, which is in Newton, just past I referenced earlier Center Street on the way up to Heartbreak Hill towards Boston College. We did not have any barriers of any kind. So there naturally can become if you don't have a barrier of any sort, there can be a coming out onto the course, and it's a narrow course. We know that. We have a lot of people coming through. The density of the Boston Marathon at that location is always going to be something. So where there's the element of hey, there's this happy medium between a celebration and cheering and supporting versus, and it shouldn't be versus, it should be, and we also need to have enough width of the road to get all the participants through. So this is the idea, and one of our learnings is that the BAA can do more to be able to work with groups all around, spectator groups, cheering groups, clubs, run clubs, also our volunteers. But we have to maintain that course so that we do have the throughput, because we do have a lot of volume coming through. So we're working on it. And talking to a lot of local groups, peer races, very, very helpful. Looking at other practices, again, bottom line is we want it to be a great day for all.
Jack, as we near a wrap here in this conversation, every new CEO wants to put a stamp on their own tenure. And do you see significant changes coming either in the near or the distant future? And I know it's early, but how do you think you'd like to be remembered as the CEO? In other words, the Jack Fleming legacy.
I have not really thought about my name in that at all. My immediate reaction, George, is that I'm drawn to the idea of how inspirational an event can be, because it can truly be transformative. I've never personally liked the idea or the expression of bucket list, because bucket list implies one and done, and you do it once and you don't need to come back. But so Boston Marathon has been known for its legacies, its lineage, its heritage. In that is the element of nostalgia, which is, I think, more important today than ever before. And maybe some don't get wildly enthusiastic about the idea of nostalgia, but once you experience nostalgia, it can be awesome. And so how do we protect what we have for the marathon, especially? Evolve ourselves, looking at better practices. How can we set this up for future generations to also have and experience, and to have it impact so positively their lives, their family, their networks' lives? And how can we be part of other events, primarily running, right? Primarily running events, and share with them what we're doing here? And can they take that back into their markets, their cities and towns, and not apply it exactly, but maybe some elements? And I'll just call out just maybe something like our champions program. I don't say past champions. Once a champion, always a champion. And, maybe there are things that are done here because we have this magnitude and support, et cetera. The idea of consecutive runners or legacy runners, right? And if they see that and how it can, or, they take those that come here, take back this and say, hey, this is what's happening in Boston, and we can apply it here. And they talk to their mayors or town managers or public safety or police chiefs, et cetera. That's, to me, that's being involved with and very involved with growing and broadening the sport. But the heritage is an aspect that, we are going to be 128 years young next year. And you think of some of the other, quote, older races that exist in the United States that may not be, most wouldn't be half as old as the Boston Marathon. And so that's an important position that we have to respect. Just like you have to respect the marathon. I guess I'm deflecting a little bit, George, in how I want to be remembered. I don't know that I want to be remembered. I want the Boston Marathon to continue to be viewed as an important race in our sport that many aspire to want to come and experience, to run in the footsteps of John J. McDermott and Clarence DeMar and Johnny Kelly and Tarzan Brown and Joan Benoit Samuelson and Jackie Gareau and Jean Driscoll, right? And Fatoma Roba and Catherine Dereba. And when they come, they are that outpouring of emotion that can happen other places. Yes, in Central Park and through the Brandenburg Gate and across Grant Park in Chicago, etc. But Boylston Street is so special. I don't know of another home stretch in sport like Boylston Street. And for someone to be able to participate in that, not just by running, could be volunteering, could be spectating, could be here for the weekend, could be here to run the 5K. Just soak it all in and say, wow, okay, yeah, that's what they're talking about with Boston, the original. I get it now.
Jack, I think it's very interesting that until just a few sentences ago, there was absolutely no talk in this conversation about elite athletes, which is what everybody talks about first at the Boston Marathon. And I think that is testimony to your centeredness and emotionality and perspective on the big picture at Boston. But my question is, wasn't it a little bit of fun to have Eliud Kipchoge in town last April? And can you tell us an inside story or two about what it was like to have Eliud there?
I would love to, and maybe now is the time. It was a surreal experience for my colleague Mary Kate and myself to watch Eliud over the past couple of years. Knowing and hearing that he did want to run Boston one day, wants to run New York one day, I believe, as well. When was the timing going to be? the years go by, right? So Eliud saw us in and around Berlin last year. His team knew we were interested. He couldn't help notice that we popped up a week later in London, and we were sincere with our. We told him we wanted him to run Boston. He's got his expressions, right? One rabbit at a time. We've all heard them on his interviews, and I believe that. And I don't know if he did know he was going to run Boston at any time earlier than Berlin last year. But he's so Zen-like. He saw us when he was warming up. I'm kind of like he opened the elevator in the Intercontinental Hotel in Berlin, and here we were. Well, I wouldn't say that we were just waiting for him, but we happened to be there. And every time, we didn't overpress, but we just made sure that he knew and his team knew that when he was ready, we really wanted him to run Boston, and we valued him. And it was going to be the same Boston Marathon with excellent competition. And no, we don't have pace setters here. And, it's a different kind of race, et cetera. It's point to end, and weather can be anything like that. But we knew how much the running community, Boston Marathoners, would want and appreciate seeing him run Boston. And so we were getting towards, the weeks were going by after Berlin last year. And he walked into this room, and he kind of gave me a high five, and he said, finally. And that was it. It was very cool, and that's kind of the word that we use with each other, kind of just how we greet each other now. If I see him, I'll say finally, and he'll say finally. Just like with Meb, whenever I see Meb around Boston, because of his victory in 2014 after 2013. And what he did for running, did for this city. Whenever a runner or whenever I see Meb, first thing I say to him is thank you. Thank you for what you did for Boston.
Well, Jack, thank you for all the time you've given us today. Before saying goodbye, we'd like to give you an opportunity to add anything else that we haven't asked you yet.
I feel like old home week speaking with both of you because of the way you both have welcomed me and been so gracious to all of Boston over your eras of work in whatever area you've been involved in, helping us along the way. You've taught us that really it has to be done with community, in community. And I think our sports realization more recently has been also in partnership. You can do so much, but our running organizations, and we're a club at heart. We are a club, not a club at heart. We are a club. We're also a club at heart. But you're only so large, and to be able to make an impact and to do the work in partnership, and I'm not just talking about corporate partnerships, community partnerships, other clubs. And I really look forward to what that looks like for our sport and in Boston in particular in the immediate years ahead. I would, there's a colleague of mine down in Atlanta, the Atlanta Track Club, Rich Kana, fantastic person, really fantastic person. And I went down there a couple of times, and saw a T-shirt that he had, or the club had, and it's called Atlanta, America's Running City. And I was like, hey, we're America's running city too, right? So I said, how come? He said, well, we are America's running city. I said, well, we're America's running city too. And what's more, running should be for all, right? It can be for all. We should be. So that's one of the things that I think our sport is aligned on now more than ever. When we all come together for that one thing, right? And I think one of those one things is that running can and should be for all. So what is our role in that? That's what I'm challenging myself with right now.
Jack Fleming, thanks so much for being our guest today on Running, State of the Sport. I think you filled in a lot of gaps with your answers about who you are and what your vision for the Boston Marathon is. And I think people are going to be very, very happy with what they heard from you. So thanks.
Keep them flying, Jack.
Thank you both. Thank you.
George, it was really great to have so much time from Jack Fleming. Did you have any particular reactions to what he said?
I did, Amby. I was really taken by his heartfelt reaction to the bombing. And the one thing that they seemed to know almost immediately was that the following year's race had to be a success for Boston, for running, and as he said, for freedom itself.
And boy, did they ever get it right. I was one of those lucky enough to run in the 2014 Boston. It was clearly the most emotional marathon ever. The fans were so great, and all of those of us on the starting line, all the way to downtown Boston, felt so lucky to be there.
Yeah, I mean, in the long, long history of the Boston Marathon, 2014 certainly goes down as one of the most memorable Bostons ever. And then add to the fact that Meb wins the race, the very rarity of an American champion just seemed to top it all off. So, Amby, what reactions did you have to our talk with Jack?
Well, first of all, I do want to mention something I didn't bring up in the interview, and that is that last April at Boston, I saw Jack Fleming on Saturday or Sunday, and he said, I'm hoping to be there and greet you at the finish line and give you your medal. And I thought to myself, well, that's a nice thought, Jack. Thank you. I'm sure you've got better things to do on Monday. But when I finished, well in the back of the pack, there was Jack. And there he did put the medal around my neck. And I have to say, it speaks quite a bit to his attention to personal details, I think. In the interview itself, I wish we had had more time to talk about those darn Boston qualifying times. And the piece that I'm not a fan of is the fact that people can hit a Boston qualifying time and then learn 6 months later that it didn't actually earn them a spot on the start line. And I think that's a shame. I tried to ask that question, but I think Jack thought I was asking a different question. And that was about a private proposal that I've made to him, along with Bill Rogers and Joan Samuelson, Jack Fultz, and a few others, saying that, we think there should be a softer qualifier for women over 65 and men over 75. It's a very small group. They don't have a lot of time left in their lives to hit another Boston qualifier, and we think they should get a little break for that. But I thought Jack indicated overall that he's satisfied with the current system, and so be it.
Amby, well, you know where I am on all that. We can't do enough for the old folks who are out there still running marathons. Maybe I sensed it a little bit differently. I thought perhaps there's some open-mindedness on Jack's part as to some of the changes we're talking about?
Well, I did certainly sense that also. He was very open-minded on virtually every topic we brought up. So that's
Right.
it for our rapid reactions to the Jack Fleming interview.
That's it for this week's episode of Running State of the Sport. We hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. We'll be back again in 2 weeks with our next episode.
Until then, please tell your friends about Running State of the Sport. We'd also appreciate a review at your favorite podcast host, like Apple Podcasts or Spotify Podcasts. In signing off, here's our hope for the state of your own personal running. Chin up, clear eyes, full heart, keep moving. Onward.